Good evening. Hope everyone is doing well. Tonight we're learning Maseches Pesachim. We're on Kuf Ches Amud Aleph, about 3/4 of the way down, 15 lines or so from the bottom, starting with the word prakton. We're in the middle of the sugya of heseba, of the requirement to lean to our left when we eat certain foods. We saw already yesterday that yes, you lean for the matzah. No, you don't lean for maror. Two different approaches within Rav Nachman. Do we say the first 2 cups get heseba and the second 2 don't, or vice versa? And the Gemara concludes that because he seems to have said both, or at least there are shitas that he said both, so therefore we're makbid on all 4 cups to do heseba. So we're going to continue, as mentioned, from the word prakton, and then we're going to be going tonight until the 2 dots on Kuf Tes Amud Beis, and then for the rest of the week, what day is Tuesday? So then Wednesday and Thursday and Saturday night, 1 blot apiece. That's what we're going to be doing. They are larger blot, which is why I forged ahead a little bit in the early parts of the week to kind of catch us up so that the weekend isn't going to be overly stressed. So let's get started. Again, continuing the sugya of heseba, the Gemara says, prakton lo shmei heseba. If a person's lying down, mamish, like flat, that's not considered to be heseba. Heseba is when you lean to the side. It's not when you're like lying in a bed. And in fact, the Meforshim here, if you look at Tosfos, Rashi says, Tosfos says, prakton panav lamala. It's not eating face down. That's not a normal way to eat. So the Balei Tosfos highlight here that we're talking about when you're lying on your back, face up. So prakton, that's not considered heseba. Continues the Gemara, 10, 12, 13 lines from the bottom, Kuches Amud Aleph, heseba simin lo shma heseba. Leaning to the right, you're not yotze with whatever you're doing. That's not called heseba. That's not called leaning. Leaning isn't to the right. It is to the left. And then the Gemara adds in the following line, velo od ela shema yaktim kana leveshet v'yavo lidei sakana. Famous line that not only is it not considered heseba, but it's also dangerous because shema yaktim kana leveshet, that maybe the food will get to the windpipe first and you can choke. That's what we call choking in English. So here there's a fascinating machlokas between Rashi and the Rashbam. I didn't know this. I probably learned this many years ago. I don't recall it at all. Take a look at Rashi, about 15 lines from the top of the page. Dibur hamaschel shema yaktim. What is that going on? When we say you can't lean when we say that you have to lean to the left because we're concerned about choking, is that learned from not leaning to the right? So look at Rashi. Rashi says, shema yaktim aprakton koi. That means lying down. When you're lying down, it's dangerous. But if you look at the Rashbam is 7 lines or so from the bottom of the page in the middle of the Dibur HaMaschel of Shema Yaktim. He writes by the period there, V'rabosai pirsu Shema Yaktim kana leveshet, deveshet have al tzad yamin. The niftach hakova, the epiglottis will open. Sha'al pi hakana, that's on top of the windpipe. Me'ei love, when he's lying back, it'll just open naturally. Kshehumate klape yamin, v'imyikanis b'maichal aris hakana, then he's going to choke. So there's a machlokas. When we say shema yaktim kana leveshet v'yavo lidei sakana, where's the sakana? Is the sakana, like Rashi says, that when you lean to your right, that you're more likely to choke, which is the predominant understanding, the way that most people have understood shema yaktim kana leveshet, or no? Maybe it's like Rashi says that the only risk of choking is lying on your back. Yes, it's still true that leaning to your right is not considered heseba, but there's no risk in choking. I think we all know, just anecdotally and experientially, that eating while you're leaning a little bit to the right, most people don't choke when they eat that way. So that may be a raya l'davar for Rashi, that what Rashi says is that where is there a sakana? That's when you're lying on your back. Nevertheless, even leaning to the right, lying out flat on your back, those things are not part of the world of heseba. Isha etzel baila lo baya heseba. A woman who is with her husband, she's eating at the table with her husband. So the halacha is lo baya heseba. Rashi here, 4 lines from the Rashbam, 4 lines from the bottom of the page. Isha ena tzricha heseba mibnei emas baala ukfufa lo. Because it was seemingly commonplace that there was a certain ema, a certain fear that a woman would have in her home. I'm probably not the right word, ema. Maybe it should be respect, don't know. Ukfufalo, and she was subservient in some way to him. But the end of the Rashbam quotes the She'iltos, umefarish b'She'iltos to Rav Achai, one of the Gaonim, just a couple of hundred years before Rashi, that no, lav dar chayu denashe lemizga wasn't about dominance, and it wasn't about anything like that. It just wasn't something that women did. It wasn't considered a thing that women did. So again, we have to get it back into the culture over the times. We don't know exactly what things were like. Is the Gemara stating a din out what's normal, or is it an objective din? So you have to get into the Rishonim here. But that's what the Gemara says here, that Isha Eitzel Baila lo boy haseba. V'misha chashuva yitzricha haseba. And this is quoted in the Ramah and Shulchan Aruch, I believe, that women who are considered chashuv, they need to do haseba. And I'm pretty sure it's quoted in the name of the Ra'avya in the Ramah that this is lahalacha. That we assume that all of the women in our culture today are considered to be chashuvos, and therefore women should do haseba wherever haseba is appropriate. What about ben eitzel aviv? So the halacha is there boy haseba. A bar mitzvah boy who's eating at the table, he does have to do haseba. Ibailu, the Gemara asks, what about a talmid eitzel rabbo? What would be the halacha if I'm eating at my Rebbe's house for Pesach by the Seder? Would I do haseba? Remember we said that the first pshat in the Rashbam is that a woman has emas ba'alo kfufalo. Wouldn't we say that a talmid lifnei rabbo has an ema of his Rebbe? That's already quoted in the Gemara elsewhere. So says the Gemara, Tashma, let's see. What would be the din of a child in front of his Rebbe? Tashma, Amar Abaye ki havinan beimar. When we were by the house of Mar, who is Mar relative to Abaye? Abaye was 4th century Amor. This is a reference to Rabbah, 3rd century, his Rebbe. Abaye is one of his Rabbeim was Rebbe. Then Zagina na birke dahadade, we leaned on each other's legs. So if there was a guy sitting next to me, I'd put my elbow on his leg and then I would eat so that I would be leaning on something. That's what they did when they were with Rabbah. However, ki asin on the Beir of Yosef, when we got to the yeshiva of Rav Yosef, Omar Lan lo tzrichisa. Lo tzarichtu, you do not need to do haseba. Why don't you need to do haseba in the base medrash of Rav Yosef? Because mora rabcha kemora shamayim. Because it's keilu, you're sitting lifnei ashchina. Now, what happened here that they went from Rabbah's base medrash to Rav Yosef's base medrash? Take a look at the Rashbam, 2 lines from the bottom. Dibur hamaschel lebei Rav Yosef. De Rabba malach mekame de Rav Yosef. Rabbah first was malach. He was the Rosh Masifta. He was the Rosh Yeshiva, and then afterwards was Rav Yosef. Fine. So that's why there was a flow of events here that Abaye started by Rabbah. There they did Heseba, and when they switched to Rav Yosef, you don't need to, because Rav Yosef was of the opinion that a Talmud Lifnei Rabbo has to treat his Rebbe Mora Rabcha Kamora Shemaim, the way that a person would treat a Kodesh Baruch Hu, and it's not appropriate to do Heseba before a Kodesh Baruch Hu if you've been sitting at the Seder table. However, we're supposed to look at that, but because there's Mora Shemaim from your with your Rebbe to a degree, therefore it should not happen. Says the Gemara, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. 5 lines from the bottom, Kuf Ches Amud Aleph. Says the Gemara as follows. Meisvei, im kol adam meisa va'afilu talmud etzel rabo. Hold on one second. It says that you do haseba even by your Rebbe. Kashan Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef just said mora rabcha k'mora shamayim. Answers the Gemara, kitanya hahi. That brisa that you just quoted that says va'afilu talmud etzel rabo wasn't talking about a talmud to a Rebbe in regards to Talmud Torah, but rather kitanya hi b'shulya denagre. This is talking about an apprentice with a carpenter. Nagre, a nagar in Hebrew is a carpenter. So you're teaching someone a trade. So under those circumstances, you're the Talmud, you're the learner, you're the apprentice. And therefore, that is where we would say that you need to. But Rav Yosef's Shita maintains its integrity. And according to Rav Yosef, you are not obligated to, and therefore you should not. 3 lines from the bottom. What about a shamish? What would we say about a servant? Is a servant obligated in Haseba? Yes or no? Says the Gemara, Tashma, Dam Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Hashamish she'ochal kazayis matzah kshu mesav yatsa. That's the end of the brisa. It says that if a shamish ate a kazayis of matzah, he has to do so while he's leaning. What's the diuk of the Gemara? 2 lines from the bottom. Mesav in. If he's leaning, then yes, that's when he's yotze, of course. But lo mesav lo. But if he's not leaning when he eats the matzah, he won't be yotze. Yotze the mitzvah b'chilas matzah shmamina by haseba shmamina. Therefore, we see that when it comes to a shamish, that he does require haseba. Last line. V'amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Nashim chayavos be'arba'a kosos halalu. Women are obligated in the 4 cups of wine. And turning to the top of Kuf Ches Mud Bey is a critical line. Sha'af hein hayu be'oso hanes. That women they partook in this particular mitzvah. Take a look at Rashi, top Rashi. Dibur hamaschel shafenei be'oso nes kedei amrina na Gemara and Sota bischar nashim tzidkanios shebe'oso ador nigalu. It is in the zechus of nashim tzidkanios that we were taken out of Mitzrayim bichlal. So certainly afen hayu be'oso hanes. Therefore, it's not just that it's din derabanan and that it's time bound, and we should have assumed for 100 reasons that women are exempt. It's not true because afen hayu be'oso hanes.
Well, we needed their schools also, or there was something back that they did.
Well, they didn't do the angle, so.
What does it say in Rashi? It says the Gemara says v'chein gabe mikra. Rashi says it's v'chein gabe mikra megillah namir minan hachid mishum de Esther nigalu v'chein gabe ner Chanukah b'Maseches Shabbos. In 3 different places, nashim goes because of them. So the diuk to make from Rashi is that without them, we would have been in big trouble. That's what it seems. That's what it seems. So that's what the Gemara says, that women are obligated in the 4 cups of wine because they were an integral part of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Arba kosas halalu tzarach sheyehei bahen kedei mezigas kos yafeh, that they need to be diluted properly. Mezigas kos yafeh. Strange language. It's not actually a shiur, but Rashi and the Rashbam, the Rishonim here, highlight that the wine that they had was very, very, very strong, and they would dilute it with a couple of parts, 3 parts of water to 1 part of wine. So that's how they would normally make it. Shisa and chai, what if you drank it without diluting it? You drank it, quote unquote, raw. Chai doesn't, we use the word chai to mean raw. It just means here that it's undiluted. So the halacha is yotzei, that you were yotzei. Shisa and bevas achas, what if you chugged all 4 cups at the same time? So then, yatsa, you're yotzei.
4 separate brachas at one time, or just
One cup after the other. L'chora, 1 cup after the other. Which would be yotzei dalet kosas. We'll see. We're going to get back to this in a second. The Gemara is going to analyze this. Hishka mehen lebanav ulevnei veso. What if you gave, you siphoned off some from your cup and gave to other people? Would that count? So the halacha is yatsa. All of these are comments of Shmuel. And now the Gemara is going to analyze these. When we say that if a person drinks wine and it's undiluted, that they're yotzei, Amar Rava, yidei yayin yatsa. Yeah, you were yotzei drinking wine, you were yotzei kiddush, but yidei cherus lo yatsa. But you were not yotzei cherus. What's cherus? What does that mean? You're not yotzei cherus. Cherus is a separate mitzvah. So take a look at Rashi here. Immediately to our left, Ibrahim Aschil, yidei cherus lo yatsa. Klomar, ein zo mitzvah shlema. Wow, what crazy idea. Unbelievable. This is not a mitzvah shlema. You're yotzei the mitzvah, but you didn't do it in the right way because you didn't have the mindset of cherus, because you didn't drink it the way that Chazal set it up for you. That's our obligation. When the Chachamim give us a construct, our job is to follow it. So Rashi highlights that you did the mitzvah, but it wasn't a mitzvah shlema. 5, 6 lines down, Shasan b'vas achas, you drank everything at once. Here too, Rav Amar yedei yayin yatsa, yeah, you were yotzei kiddush, but yedei arba kosos lo yatsa, but you do not get the mitzvah of fulfilling the rabbinic custom of drinking 4 cups of wine. Hishke mehen lebanavu livnei veso yatsa. We said that if you give wine and you siphon off to some of your children, when you pour a little bit of wine into those cups, that the spray cups where it puts into like 8 different cups, good. So you're yotzei if you share your wine with everyone, that's true. But Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak be'ahu de'ishtei ruba dekasa. That's only true if you drink rov kos. In other words, we have a din that when it comes to the arba kosos, that one needs to drink rov kos. Very good. Asks the Gemara 1/3 of the way down on Kuf Ches Amud Beis, says the Gemara as follows: Meisvei Daled kosos halalu tzarach sheyeh bohen kedei reviz. A different language. We said before that it has to be kos yafeh. Now we're using a different language of kedei reviz. Are those the same thing? Let's finish the brisa. Is this a brisa? No. Sorry, this is a Tosefta. The Tosefta says that Daled kosos halalu tzarach sheyeh bohen kedei reviz. Echad chai ve'echad mazug, whether or not it's raw, it's undiluted, or if it's diluted. Mazug means diluted. Echad chadash ve'echad yashan, even if the wine is brand new or if it's aged wine. Rabbi Yehuda Omer tzarich sheben tam umare yain, also has to taste like wine and it has to look like wine. So we're going to analyze all of this. Katani mihas, this phrase katani mihas always means that we're about to give the punchline of our question. Katani mihas, however, in fact, it says in the brisa, mihas means however, katani in the brisa, k'dei revi'is, v'atamers kos yafeh, Yushmol said kos yafeh, and this says k'dei revi'is. That sounds like different things. And if you look in the Rashbam, about 20 lines from the bottom, most of the 3/4, 4/5 of the way down in, on the page, it says dibra masal katani mihas k'dei revi'is l'kol echad ve'echad, v'atamers k'dei digas kos yafeh l'kol echad ve'echad. V'sal kadaitach, what might I have thought, says the Rashbam, the shnei shiurim. It seems like they're not the same thing. So back in the Gemara, what should we do? Shmuel, you said Meziga Kadei Kos Yafeh, and here it seems to say that you need a revi'is. Are those the same thing? Amrei, they would answer, Shmuel would answer, you're right, yeah, they are the same thing. Idi ve'idi chad shiuruhu, mai Kadei Mezigas Kos Yafeh de'kamar, l'kol chad v'chad da'hav kulu revi'is. We need to make sure that there's a revi'is in every cup and everyone should drink a sufficient amount. What about the last part of that Tosefta that we just saw? Where it said Rabbi Yehuda Omer tzarich shehebo tam umara Amar Rava. What is he talking about? My time of Rabbi Yehuda. Why does he say that it has to have the tam, the flavor of, and umare, the appearance of wine? Tichsiv al tere yain ki is what? Ki is adam. Is it read it correct? Yeah, ki is adam. Al tere yain ki is adam. That it should have a redness to it. That's some of the Meforshim point out. I don't drink red wine, but some Meforshim say you should splash a little red into the white wine if what you can drink is red, is only white wine, so that it fulfills a kiyum. It's a kiyum of this pasuk. Can't drink red grapes, a total restriction. So, but I can have a little splash, that's fine. So it's best if you're going to drink white wine because it's your preference, fine, but you should have a little bit of red in it. There's some, unfortunately, some poskim who write that way. There's also other shitas in the poskim who say that that's only true if red wine is actually better. But if your white wine is more chashuv, it's more expensive, it's older, whatever the parameters are. If by you it's more chashuv, then you don't have to make it white. You don't have to make it red. Ask your local Orthodox rabbi. 4 lines from the bottom, Kuf Ches Mid Beis. Let's continue. Tana Rabbanon. Hakol chayavin ba'arba'a kosas halalu. Everyone is obligated in these 4 cups of wine, and then the Gemara goes in to specify. The Brisa writes, Echad anoshim ve'echad nashim, men and women, ve'echad tinokos, even little children, they're obligated as well. Well, what does that mean? Why would children be obligated? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, still part of the Brisa, v'chimato elas yesh letinokos b'yayin. Why are you giving wine to a little kid? What good is that going to do? That doesn't teach them anything. There's nothing educational about giving a little child wine, but rather, what should you do? His question was rhetorical. Of course, you should not give them wine. What should you do? Last line, Kuf Ches Mid Beis, Elam Mechalken Lohen Kilayos. You pass out Kilayos ve'egozim. You give them dried grains, which was a snack back in the day. Granola bars would be our equivalent of today. Ve'egozim. No, it's just, obviously it wasn't chametz. Yeah, for sure not. That's what Rashi says, Kale Mechitim Yeshanim. They're old and I guess they were baked as is or something like that. But it certainly, there was no chimutz, obviously. Ve'egozim. Be'erev Pesach. Why do you give them out on Erev Pesach? So that they don't go to sleep. V'yishalu, and they'll ask questions, and that will lead them to a better understanding. We know, of course, the famous theme of the Haggadah is Ve'yigadat levincha bayom limor ki bavurzeh. Okay, so all of this is to engage the children. So that's why the Gemara says we give them things that are out of the ordinary. We do a lot of weird things at the Seder that we wouldn't otherwise normally do, just in order to engage the children. Amar Alav al Rabbi Akiva, second line, Kuf Testament Aleph. They say about Rabbi Akiva, Shemachale Klos ve'gozim letinokos be'erev Pesach, Kedeshelo Yeshanu v'Yishalu. Same exact thing. Excuse me. Same exact thing, that he would hand out these dried grains and he'd hand out egozim to children so that they'd stay awake, so they wouldn't sleep, and that they'd ask questions. Tanya as well. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Chotfin Matzos B'leilei Pesachim B'shvil Tinokos Shelo Yishnu. They would let the kids eat matzah, but they wouldn't let them stuff themselves to the point that they get so full, and the Meforshim point out, and therefore so tired. We didn't want them to fall asleep, so they would take away the matzahs after they'd eaten a shiur B'shvil Tinokos Shelo Yishnu, so they wouldn't fall asleep. Another brisa, Tanya, the brisa writes, Amar Lava Rabbi Akiva Miyamav, in his whole life. Lo Amar Higia Eis La'amod Beveis HaMedrash. He never said it's time to leave the Beis Medrash, with only 2 exceptions. Number 1, Chutz Me'arvei Pesachim ve'erev Yom HaKippurim. Those were the only 2 days when they didn't have yeshiva. Those were the only 2 days of vacation a year, and they were all rooted in halacha. Be'erev Pesach B'shvil Tinokos Shelo Yeshnu. We didn't want the kids to fall asleep, so we made sure that we would go home and engage the kids and give them the klayos and egozim, as we saw from Rabbi Akiva a few lines ago. Be'erev Yom HaKippurim.
We can't take a nap before Seder?
No, I think this is more for the chinuch component. It's technically mutter to take a nap on Erev Pesach, but I think here we're talking about possibly even later in the day. But we didn't want them to fall asleep when they were eating. The Erev Yom Kippurim kadesh ya'achilu es b'neim, and on Erev Yom Kippur to feed their children. Of course, we know that kol ha'ochel b'tshi ki'ilu mis'aneh b'tshi v'asiri. If you eat on the 9th day in preparation for, we know that according to the Monei mitzvos, there's a mitzvah d'oraisa. We've seen this already somewhere in Shas, I believe, a couple of times.
Sounds too easy.
Baruch Hashem, some mitzvos are harder to fulfill than others. But if the Torah wants us to eat on Erev Yom Kippur, we're going to eat on Erev Yom Kippur. That's when the Dunkin' Donuts lines are just unmanageable at that point. So that's a mitzvah d'oraisa. Machlokes, if the same mitzvah applies to men and women, the Chora does, because it's iskash. It's compared to the Isser of eating on Yom Kippur. By that, men and women are obligated as well. So therefore, it's probably the case, according to many poskim, that women are mechuyavos to eat on Erev Yom Kippurim as well. Nevertheless, these were the only 2 days that Rabbi Akiva would let out of yeshiva. Tanu Rabbanan, where we have to learn about a very important mitzvah d'oraisa. The Chora, this mitzvah d'oraisa still applies today. It's counted in the Monei HaMitzvos. It's quoted in the Sefer HaChinuch, and I believe in the Rambam as well, in his Sefer HaMitzvos. Says the Gemara as follows: Chayiv Adam l'sameach banav uvnei veiso beregel shene'emar v'samachta b'chagecha. A person is obligated to make happy those who live in his house, his sons, and those, not sons literally, but children overarchingly, all of the people who live in his house. Because of the pasuk v'samachta b'chagecha. V'ameh mesamchem. What do we do in order to make people happy? What does this question mean? Take a look at Tosfos, just to our left. V'ameh mesamchem b'yayin. Hainu bizman hazeh. Although bizman beis hamikdash ein simcha lebabasar. We would have eaten a korban shlamim. The korban ola that would have been given on whatever, that can't be eaten, but a korban shlamim is part goes to Hashem, part goes to us. That would have been the v'samachta b'chagecha, to eat from the basar of a korban for sure. But today, in the absence of basar, because we don't have a beis hamikdash, so then what do? We drink wine. Rabbi Yehuda Omer anashim b'ra'oi lahem, v'nashim b'ra'oi lahem. Rabbi Yehuda was more. It really depends on what you like. Some people like wine, some people don't like wine. Depends on who you are. So men should get what they should get, and women should get what they should get. Anashim b'roi lahem b'yayin. Nothing changed, right? Even by Rabbi Yehuda, when he's saying we have to be subjective, still the men should be drinking the wine, right? The nashim b'mai. What should women get? We should buy women clothes. Tani Rav Yosef b'Bavel b'Bigdei Tzivonim. In Bavel, Dafka women would wear colorful clothing when it came to the holidays. The Eretz Yisrael, the big day pishtan meguhatzin, and in Eretz Yisrael they would wear flax clothing that was meguhatzin, that were ironed, that were pressed, and they looked very, very nice. So that was it just depends, but that's l'chora din d'oraisa, that it's an obligation for men to drink wine. You'll see in many homes where people will make sure to have a bottle of wine at every meal, and people will try to drink a revius of wine at every meal. L'shem, this exact mitzvah v'samachta b'chagecha. And women should. This seems like an obligation on the Baal Habayis. Chayv Adam l'samech b'anav u'bnei beso, and the husband should send his wife shopping to go buy clothes, whatever it is, however it works out, so that we can be mekayim the din d'oraisa b'samachta b'chagecha. It's a mitzvah in the Torah. And it seems from Tosfos, the way that Tosfos was talking in Dibur Maschel B'mem Esamcho B'yayin, that it applies even today. And the Sefer HaChinuch writes that explicitly, that yes, it's true, we'd prefer to have a shlamim, but it doesn't mean that the din d'oraisa doesn't apply today. Not dissimilar to matzah. We don't have the matzah, korban Pesach, and mar. We don't have that. Pesach, matzah, mar, we don't have. But still the mitzvah separately, even to Bizman Hazeh, we still have the mitzvah d'oraisa b'chilas matzah. So here too, we don't have the shlamim, but afal pikim, we still have a mitzvah to be mesameach on the chai. Halfway down, Kuf Tes Madal. Tanya Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer Bizman Beis Hamikdash Kaim and Simcha LeBasar, when the Beis Hamikdash is around, it's only meat. And Amar v'Zavachta Shlamim v'Achalta Hashem v'Samachta Lifnei Hashem Elokecha. V'Achshav She'ein Beis Hamikdash Kaim and Simcha LeBayayin. A very explicit statement from another brisa of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Shene'emar v'Yayin Yisamach Levav Enosh, that wine makes people happy. And speaking of wine, we're going to talk about a Gemara. We're going to skip all the math. If you have the art scroll, you'll see as we get closer to the next page that there's a huge, big fat math equation. We're not going to go through all of the details, but suffice it to say that it is a sophisticated approach to determine exactly what a revius is, and you could therefore understand why there remains a big machlokas between Rav Chaim Noah and the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish was of the opinion that it was above 5 ounces to have a revius, which is a very significant thing when you're drinking 4 cups of wine, especially if there's a high alcohol content. Mashain Kain of Chaim Noah was more mekel, and he felt that it was less. It was 3.3 ounces, which is the prevailing custom. And a lot of that is rooted in this Gemara that we're about to learn. So it says the Gemara as follows: 2/3 of the way down, maybe a little bit more. Kuf Tes Amud Aleph. Amar Rav Yitzchak. This will be the last set of sugyas we'll learn for tonight. Kasta de Murisa. There was a measuring tool that was used to measure the fat from fish, the Hava B'tzipori. He havas kimin luga de mikdash, and it was the same size as a lug, as a measuring cup of a lug in the mikdash. Uba misharin revius shel Pesach, and that's what they would use to get a revius in regards to Pesach, in regards to the Daled Kosos. Amar Rav Yochanan. There was actually another thing. Tmanyasa kadmaisa. There was a very old measuring tool called the Tmanyasa, Tava B'Tveria, and it was in the city of Tveria. So havas Yisera alda riva, and it was larger. The Tmanyasa was larger than the Kasta, than the first one we learned about, by a revius. So meaning if you filled up the Tmanyasa and how does it work? And you poured it out. So then what was left over was a revius in the Tmanyasa. And the larger one, it was what was left over. The difference between the initial kli and the second kli was that when you poured out the contents of the initial kli into the second kli, the remnants in the initial kli was the revius, and that's how they would measure. Very sophisticated. Now you go to the store, you buy a measuring cup, and we know exactly to the milliliter. We know exactly. Okay, they didn't have those types of tools. So and that's how they figured it out. 6-7 lines from the bottom of Rav Chizda. The way that they would measure a revius was based on a cubical area, not perfectly cubed, I think the art scroll called it a cuboid, which isn't perfectly cubical. It's not x cubed. It was 2 dimensions were the same, but the third wasn't. And here's how the 3 dimensions played out. 6 lines from the bottom. Amar Rav Chizda, Revis shel Torah. When we speak about a revis in halachic terms, etzba'ayim al etzba'ayim. It's 2 finger breadths on the x-axis, 2 finger breadths on the y-axis. So that's right to left, front and back. And then the depth of it was al berum, with a depth of etzba'ayim v'chatzi etzba v'chomesh etzba. It's that third dimension is 2 finger breadths plus a half of a finger plus 2/10 of a finger, v'chomesh 1/5 of a finger. It ends up being 2.7. So here's how the math works. It is a cubic area of 2 by 2 by 2.7, which with each unit being a finger breadth. That's how the Gemara paints this picture. And then the Gemara says a line which is very hard, which says Kidetanya, like we have in a brisa. Now, the Gemara is not going to circle back and say a perfect comparison from this brisa, because this brisa is not talking about wine. What the brisa is talking about, and what I believe is the reason why the Gemara is making this comparison, is to show you that we measure the liquids in halacha by cube volume. We don't just measure based on kibetza, we measure based on cubic volume. So we said that when it comes to the revis, it's 2 etzbaos by 2 etzbaos by 2.7 etzbaos. Good. 3.3, 5.6, whatever the poskim end up concluding. Look at the art scroll, a crazy math equation. Fine. What about a mikvah? How do we get to 40 sa? So there says the Gemara Kedetanya, the pasuk writes that one should wash in water all of their body. This is, of course, a drasha, which indicates the din of chatzitza. Very important halacha as it relates to going to the mikvah, especially for women. Mida oraisa, a chatzitza is considered when it's rubo makbid, when it covers most of your body and you wish it was not there. Let's say a person fell into a vat of paint and it's covering 51% of their body and they couldn't remove it. So that's le'ikuva, mida oraisa. If a woman goes to the mikvah as a nida, or after her nida state, she goes to the mikvah after Sheva Nakim, she's still a nida, mida oraisa, if she's 51% covered in paint. That doesn't work. Midirabanan, either one of those, either rubo ve'eno makbid, let's say it's 51%, but she doesn't care, or it's miut umakbid, it's less than 51%, it's her toenails, but makbid, I want my toenails painted, I want my nails painted. So the Rabbanim, I've spoken to Rabbi Robinson about this before. Sometimes a woman will be at the mikvah saying, I have nail polish on and I just spent $50 on a no-chip manicure. What should I do? So that's already a shaila in the poskim, because technically speaking, it shouldn't be a problem. It's miut, it's eno makbid, it's miut and makbid, it's only a din derabanan, and can we be mikkel when there's a hefsid? So this is where the poskim come up. Anyways, this is one of the roots. I mean, we've seen this elsewhere in Shas, as you can see in the Meforshim here. This Bryce is probably quoted all over Shas. It's quoted in 5 places here. It's in Erev and Daf Dalid and in Yud Dalid Yom Al. You can see in the Mari Makomos on the side. This is a well-known Gemara. One should be careful when they go into a mikvah in regards to chatzitza. Big shilas, if a woman has a cast and she has to go to a whole host of shilas. What about dentures? What about braces? Everything. What if you forgot to floss? You have food in your teeth? Shilas, endless shilas. Fine. The drasha continues. B'mayim b'mei mikvah. What type of water does one have to be in? They have to be in mikvah water. They have to be in appropriate water that's collected. All the mikvahs that we have are built in a very sophisticated way. Es kol bisaro. What does that part mean? Mayim shekol gufo ole bahen. It has to be an amount of water that can cover one's entire body. And v'kamahein, for the average person, how much water is that? Now remember that I shared earlier that the way we measure the revis is in cubical measures. We're going to do the same thing here with mikvah water. How do we determine the amount of water that's appropriate for a mikvah? In cubical measures. Ama al ama berum shalosh amos. So it's length times width times height is volume. This is going to be 3 cubic amos is going to be the appropriate measure to fit the whole body of a person. A person could dunk in that water and be covered by that water. That's an assumption of a minimum amount of water. Our mikvahs are bigger than this, but v'shiur chachamim shiur may mikvah are boim. So we assume that that's 40. So that's the Gemara's comparison. Again, it's not a direct comparison in that we know that the revis over there, it's not about a revis. It's about measuring things in cubical measures. So that's what we did by revis, kidetanya, just like we saw when it comes to measuring mei mikvah. Good. Last small sugya for the night, and this will take us to the 2 dots in the middle of the page, and we'll stop here. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Ashi, Amar li Ravin bar Chinana, Shulchan shel Mikdash shel Prakim hava. The Shulchan in the base of Mikdash must have been shel Prakim. It was actually made in pieces. You know, like the types of tables that we have, you can remove a leaf. So these tables, you could dismantle them. How do we know that this is true? Because says the Gemara, if you would have said haduke hava mehadak, that they were so tightly put together that you couldn't take them apart, amasa hechimat bele. Well, the table was bigger than an amma. So how could you put it in the mikvah that's only 1 by 1 by 3? That's minimal shiur. How do you even fit that thing in there when it becomes tameh or when it initially was to be made? So says the Gemara, that's not a good question. My kushya, what kind of question is that? Dilma biyam she'asa Shlomo. Maybe it was in a body of water that Shlomo put together. We learned about this in Maseches Shabbos. Have a matbile. Maybe that's where it was tavel b'mikvah. The Tani Reb Chia, because Reb Chia taught us yam she'asa Shlomo machzik meya v'chamishim mikvah tara. You could fit 150 mikvahs in there. Huge. It was just massive. It was a massive body of water. So therefore, we can't necessarily infer from here that the Shulchan Shel Mikdash was made of prakim. Maybe it was haduke mahadik. We don't know, but there's no raya that it was actually made piecemeal, that it was dismantleable. That's not a word, but you get the point. We don't know because it's possible that it was put in the mikvah there. So we're going to stop here. Mirza Hashem. Tomorrow night is Wednesday. We're going to learn Kuf Yud. Thursday is only 1 blot Kuf Yud Aleph, and skip Friday. And Kuf Yud Beis will be Motzei Shabbos. No shiur in person on Shabbos, only Motzei Shabbos, 8:40, and only on Zoom. Wishing you all a beautiful night.